Hey everyone, welcome back to the Libertas International podcast. I'm super excited to be back with you today, interviewing my good buddy Tyson Wright, and he is the founder and president of the International Coalition for Prevention and Empowerment, or Prevention Empowerment as it's for short, focusing on preventing human trafficking, preventing exploitation, preventing all these kinds of abuses in the developing world and also in the United States in indigenous communities. It's a really awesome conversation. It's a fascinating conversation with him based on his knowledge of working anti-human trafficking for a number of years and with a number of different organizations. And I really admire his story. He was with an organization, a bigger organization, that decided to just leave these people high and dry, and he stood up and said no. I made a promise to these people, made a commitment to these people, and they want prevention, they want empowerment, they want education. I'm going to give that to them with or without you. And he decided without you. And so he started this organization, and it was really awesome to talk with him and to ask him some really hard questions about prevention. Prevention is, in anti-human trafficking circles, it's something that's very talked about. It's conversed a lot, but everybody does it in a little bit of a different way, and there's a lot of resources behind that, which can create some controversy. And when Libertas first got started under the name Gifts of Grace, we tried prevention and we did not do it well. And that's been documented in our stories, in our podcasts, of just us owning up and being like, we did not do that as well as we should have. So I think Tyson's going about it in the right way, and I really enjoyed our conversation together. Before we get moving, a few housekeeping items. We are coming up toward the end of the year. If you have companies and businesses are looking to write off a tax donation, we are a 501c3 nonprofit. Every donation made to Libertas International is tax deductible. Over 80% of dollars donated go directly toward the mission. We're very transparent about what we do, and so if you got in you to make a donation, our website is libertasinternational.org. We're on all social media. We are on X, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, all the different websites, LinkedIn. We're always looking for more monthly donors. So if you're enjoying the show, go to libertasinternational.org and become a monthly donor. That's my favorite people of the whole organization, because it allows us to plan to receive new survivors into our survivor family. And then our podcast, we're coming up. We're coming close to 50 episodes if we're not there already. To save some more marketing dollars, once a podcast has been on our channels for about a year, we're going to move them over to our YouTube channel, so we're not paying for extra bandwidth on our podcasting platform. And so if you're just new to the Libertas International podcast, first thing I would encourage you to do is go and leave us a 5-star review. Say something nice, an episode you enjoyed. It really does help us in our algorithm and getting people aware of like what we're doing. There's a lot of podcasts out there talking about anti-human trafficking, and a lot of them are not good. They come from people that don't have experience in the field. They have come from people that are just looking to exploit the movement or exploit survivor stories. We're not that way. We want to make sure that people have resources and education, and so we want to be in the top of when people type in anti-human trafficking podcast. And so leave us a 5-star review. It really does help. And if you want to hear some of our early episodes, our first 3 episodes that came out right when this podcast launched: Welcome to Libertas International, Project Maverick in Guatemala, where we talk about a recovery operation that we did with Homeland Security Investigations and the Guatemalan National Police to recover a 14-year-old girl from her stepdad. And then the most famous victim statement in Miami, Monsters Like You, Dad. Those episodes will be on our YouTube channel, but we're leaving the interview podcast on our podcasting platform on YouTube Podcasts, Spotify, and Apple, so that people continue to have access to those interviews, because people really like those interviews much more than they like me talking by myself, which is understandable. I also enjoy those much more than listening to myself talk. Speaking of that, without further ado, I want to introduce Tyson Wright to the podcast again. I'm so thankful that he took the time. I deeply admire how his commitment to the people that he serves, his knowledge, and his compassion in doing it in a survivor-centered way. And I know that parents, especially, will gain a lot out of this conversation on how to really keep your kids safe from the threats out there. So, without further ado, enjoy Tyson Wright, the founder of the International Coalition for Prevention and Empowerment. Tyson, man, welcome to the Libertas International podcast. How is your day going?
It's going good. Thanks for having me on. It's good to see you.
Yeah, you too. I'm really excited that you're on and you're here to talk about just your new organization, what you're doing to continue the fight in anti-human trafficking. You and I have known each other, I think, for about 4 years now, 5 years maybe, and I'm really excited to see and to hear all you've got going on. So, Tyson, I guess to start, tell us a little bit about your story, man. Tell us about what makes Tyson tick, what makes Tyson want to fight human trafficking. How did it start? And tell us a little bit about your story.
Yeah. The anti-human trafficking movement was never anything that was on my radar to do. It was something that came about actually because of my wife. She went to an event and heard about some anti-human trafficking work that was being done and told me about it, came home and told me about it. And I was like, I'd never heard of this. And I was like probably most people, shocked by what I heard and some of the statistics as I looked into it and realized, how prevalent of a problem it is. And so I jumped in any way that I could. And in the beginning, it was raising awareness in my community. It was supporting local organizations, volunteering where I could. And from there, it just turned into a passion. And one now that I'm just grateful that I get to continue to work in and support the efforts of day to day. But, for me, probably like a lot of people in the space right now, since it is kind of a growing space of anti-human trafficking, it's not something that I really ever planned on. I didn't set a path to become start an organization or to be in the anti-human trafficking space, but it's one that I don't see myself not being in now, just because of that passion that's grown from it. But not only, anti-human trafficking, as far as something that's a passion of mine, but just the support of victims and survivors of any type of abuse is something that's close to my heart, and close to my wife's as well. And she's a big driving force of my efforts and knowledge over the years in learning about individuals. She's a therapist by trade and supports victims of sexual assault and domestic violence and all sorts of traumas she helps individuals with. And so hearing and seeing what she does, kind of both of us have teamed up, and it's a passion of ours to support those who don't have the support.
Well, you guys are definitely a power couple, man. That's awesome. I think I've met your wife, I think twice, and I had forgotten that she's a therapist. So it makes total sense that you guys continue in that space. Well, tell us about you said you support a lot of local organizations. You raised awareness in your community, and so uh, but recently you decided to kind of do your own thing and to have something that's totally your own. Tell us about the organization, what's its name, where can people find you, and what are you guys doing?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you and I met at a previous organization that we worked at, and both no longer there. And for me, I developed a lot of relationships in working in the prevention space, and how do we prevent human trafficking? And it's usually one of three areas that most organizations focus on. Either you're supporting law enforcement in the investigations, you're supporting survivors in aftercare, or prevention. Those are the kind of the three main areas. And we've decided that prevention is where we want to put our efforts to try to disrupt the cycles that exist within human trafficking, the cycles of grooming, the cycles of abuse, the cycles of silence. How do we break some of those cycles? And so when I left, the previous organizations, th- there wasn't going to be prevention going forward. The relationships that I had built, the programs that was working on, were just going to end. And to me, I was like, that can't happen. We can't have that. So seamlessly and very fortunately, just transitioned into my starting up my own organization to continue those same efforts, continue the programs, continue the relationships that I was working on there. So I started an organization. It's called International Coalition for Prevention and Empowerment. More shortly, Prevent Empower is what we go by. It's a little shorter. Um, we're on growing in our social media presence. We're growing online um, slowly, and one of the reasons that we focus on that is we're growing so slowly in that is because ultimately it's not about our organization. And I know you function the same way. It's about the survivors for you. It's about the individuals that you get the honor of helping and being a part of their lives. And for us, it's about the organizations that are in communities that we get to support, that we get to help bring their vision to life in how they're fighting human trafficking. We have some programs that we supplement into work in communities. On the prevention side, we support their vision. So we don't have a major presence right now in social media and online yet, but it is growing. Most of our hashtags are prevent empower is usually most of them what they're out. That's our website as well, preventempower.org, where people can find out some information about us and the work that we're doing.
Well, we'll definitely when we put this podcast out, we'll do like a joint publication, like because Libertas have been around for so long, like we have a growing social media presence that has I think 45,000 followers. I think is at our recent Instagram count, and so we'll definitely like do like a joint post and see if we can send some of those followers your way so they can see what you guys are going on, what you guys have going on as well. Um, well, why you mentioned the prevention. Prevention it's one of the the five pillars of anti-human trafficking, one of the five P's or what they call it. It's always in like all the reports put out by the Department of State. Why did you fixate so much on prevention? Like what about prevention, I guess, calls to Tyson? Like why prevention out of all these things?
Yeah, I'm sure you've heard the analogy or the legend or the myth, whatever you want to call it, of going upstream, right? There's an individual who lives by a river and he sees a child floating down the river and he rescues that child out of the river. And he says, what's going on? And the kid says, hey, I fell in the river and thanks for saving me. And the next day, another kid floats down. And this continues day after day, children floating down. And finally, the farmer or the individual goes upstream to see what's going on and finds a village in disarray and kids falling into the river there in that village. And so he decides to help that village, mend their bridges and fix their houses and build up this village so that kids stop falling in. And that I heard that years and years ago as I was doing some advocacy work, and it stuck with me as we there's an important value in an intervention helping someone out of situation, and the same thing goes with human trafficking. There's an importance to supporting law enforcement in recovery efforts and helping individuals get out of the situations that they're stuck in because it happens. They're there 100%. There's individuals around the world who are being trafficked at this very moment who need that intervention to happen. But for me, I like the idea of how do we even stop that from happening? How do we stop an individual from ending up being trafficked? And so it's always resonated with me. And like I said, there's a lot of people, there's a lot of organizations who focus on supporting law enforcement and interventions, and a lot of organizations that focus on supporting survivors, which again is very much needed. But there's less organizations that focus on the prevention side, and so there's a major need for it as well. In how can we disrupt that? With that said, though, it's not easy work. It's a major uphill battle of how do you prevent something like human trafficking.
Yeah, that's actually my next question. Like what are you seeing as far as like obviously you just explained really well of like with that analogy why prevention is important. Like what do you when you talk about like bridges or infrastructure, like what does that translate to in like in the field? Like what are some of those underlying vulnerabilities that you guys are looking to prevent so that there's less victims of trafficking in the world? Like what are those underlying factors that cause someone to end up in a situation of trafficking?
Yeah, it's I mean, you use the key word there, vulnerability that exists in an individual and in communities. It can be in both, and so it's important to recognize that and to target those. And usually, when a vulnerability exists, it's because an individual doesn't have a need in their life that's being met. And I focus on the word need. It's not a want. It's not because I want new clothes or I want, to have a happy lifestyle. These are the needs that we have. And so often we'll point back to Maslow from years and years ago, the famous psychologist, and his hierarchy of needs. So at the bottom, you have food, water, your basic physiological necessities of life, right? And that actually is the number one vulnerability exploited by traffickers is individuals who are caught in poverty around the world. And there's so many reasons on why an individual is stuck in the cycle of poverty somewhere in the world. That could be because of lack of access to education. That could be because of the lack of access to healthcare. Opportunity may not be there for them to do much more than just survive and sustain in life. And traffickers know that, and they target those individuals in those communities. But those aren't the only vulnerabilities that exist. As you move up Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you start to get into needs such as belonging, feeling like you're part of a community, that you have people who support you and love you. Uh, love and connection with others is a need that we as humans have to have in our life. There's been countless studies on individuals who, either have not been connected to society and the ill effects that that has on individuals. Just us as a species, we're a community focused species. We love being around people and we have to. And again, that's another area that traffickers will target. And so because there's so much variety in where these vulnerabilities come from, we have to we can't just have the golden bullet answer right on what fixes it. We have to first understand the community or the individuals that we're working with. So in again, most places, it's going to come back to poverty in a lot of places. So how can we disrupt poverty? How can we provide more opportunity for communities, for individuals in areas around the world, and disrupt these vulnerabilities that exist in different areas?
So a question that we get a lot, like just on our social media channels or when we do like public speeches, it's always from concerned parents. I know you mentioned that you're a parent, and so
Mhm.
you think about, I'm sure you think about those things of like how to keep your kids safe from traffickers. And so like especially during an election year, I bring this up because I just saw a post like this last week where it was it was someone that went on TikTok or went Instagram live and talked about they were in Target and someone was following them around, and it was really scary and they thought maybe a trafficker or kidnapper or something like that, and that they were afraid their kids and themselves might have been trafficked. And obviously like there's articles on the reality of like situations like that. And so like coming from someone that actually works in prevention, if a parent were to ask you how to keep myself or my kids safe from traffickers, what advice would you give them on how to lower their vulnerabilities to be exploited in that way?
I think that this question would come back to again, trafficking looks different everywhere. And so I think in prepping to answer this question, I think if we hone down to say here in the United States, I think our answer goes a little bit different of a direction, just because in the United States, most of us are more well off. We have access to education, we have access to resources, even if that's through social services of some sort. We have access to those things, and so often, many times here in the United States, it's traffickers will target individuals based on maybe a higher level of a vulnerability, maybe something along the lines of belonging or connection or love. And here in the United States, so often that goes to an online setting. We spend so much time here in the United States online and around the globe as a society more and more is becoming digital in what we do. We go there to shop, we go there to learn, we go there to connect with
We go there
others.
to date, bro.
And
We go there to date.
yeah, anything. I mean, I don't know the last time, like me and my wife, whenever we go, hey, we need something around the house, if it's not like a perishable food item, we go online to look for it, right? Like, where can I find it online? Where can I order it and have it come in? And sometimes I'm even like, wait, why didn't we just buy this local? It would have got here faster, and but it's just where we're at in the world. And traffickers know that, and they go into a digital space, and they interact with individuals, especially children online, if that's who they're targeting. So, as a parent, and for me as a parent with young children, our oldest is 5, and so technology is not really a part of her life a whole lot. But as she's going to get older, we're talking about online safety. I think that's number one thing that a parent can do is talk about online safety. But with that said, we need to approach the conversation in the right way. Pretty much every kid that I know of, as soon as an adult, especially a parent, brings up the topic of online safety, every kid's going to kind of shut down. They're going to shrink back. They don't want to have that conversation. And what I found in talking with kids and learning over the years is that it's because of the way that parents and caregivers approach that conversation. And one thing that we love to flaunt as caregivers is the trump card of I can take it away, I can shut it down, I'm in charge, right? And that does nothing in facilitating a good conversation. And so we need to approach the conversation in a better way. Over the years, I've had the opportunity of presenting it at lots of high schools and to teenagers, and talking about online safety. And I usually talk about the grooming cycle, about and give examples of how traffickers and predators are reaching out to kids online. I show, messages from known predators to children, in that conversation, and they're charming, they're nice, they ask about their day, right? It's not creepy. They don't start off with, "Hey, send me a nude." It builds a relationship, and so it's important that kids know that. And we talk about then what happens. And I go through the grooming cycle and the shame that predator will try to make them feel. And after I just define that to the kids and help them understand that, I ask them, how many of you, if this was happening to you, how many of you would reach out to an adult, would talk to your parent about this? And usually it's only about 10% of kids who ever raise their hand and say, I'd talk to someone about this happening. And I go further and I say, why not? Why won't you? And they say, it's because I'm gonna be the one who's in trouble. I'm gonna be the one who's at fault in it. I'm gonna be the one who's punished for what's happened in that. They feel guilty, they feel shame. Those are the most common answers that I get. And to me, as a caregiver, again, with my kids, I would hate for my kids to be in that situation, to be stuck, being abused and exploited by an individual online, but not feeling like they can go to that trusted adult, that support system that should be there, because they're going to feel shame and blame. So we need to change our focus of as caregivers of parents. How do we approach this conversation? How can I not just see my kid as this mindless, not intelligent individual who's out there just being dumb online? Because most kids aren't, right? They're not out there purposefully looking to be exploited. And we need to see them as joint in this conversation. How can we talk with them and let them know that we care, that we love about them, and that's why we're having this conversation. That let them know we won't judge them, we won't hold them accountable for what happens online. Sure, there'll be a time for learning, there'll be a time to help them course correct on maybe where they could have done right, but in the beginning, all they need is support. All they need is love. They need someone to listen. And I think that's an important piece as a parent is starting now to build that foundation, to build that trust with your child so that if something happens, even if it's just a weird interaction, they feel comfortable coming to you. Because so often predators rely on silence. They rely on that individual to be isolated from their support system. And we have to break that down as that support system. We have to stay there and change the way we approach this so that we are there, so that our kids understand that we do care, that we're not going to judge them, that we're not going to hold them accountable for what a predator purposefully did to break into their life and to exploit them. And I think that's a huge aspect of it. I think the other piece, like you mentioned, is we have to be aware of the realities of what human trafficking looks like. There are the situations where there's an abduction there, but that's very rare. That doesn't happen very often. Usually, it's through an individual who works their way into that individual's life, either through an online interaction or a friendship in person somewhere where they build trust, where they build a relationship, they'll oftentimes develop a scheme to convince them that they have a way to disrupt that vulnerability. They'll convince them that they have a job opportunity or that they care about them, that they love them. And if they, come and live with them, or if they move away from their support system, that they'll understand and they'll be that person that they need to care and love them. Uh, our kids need to understand that. They need to understand these schemes and the realities of it. Because if we're just looking for the individual at target, if we're only looking at these extreme situations of abductions, or only looking here in the United States, if we're only looking at the southern border, we're going to miss the realities of what human trafficking is. Most times, as with all types of abuse, it's someone they know. It's a family member, it's a close friend, it's a relative, it's an intimate partner that they've built a relationship with over time. It's most of the time not that random stranger abduction.
It's it's so funny about like the southern border. It's being an election year, people use human trafficking to gain some votes and to stoke some fear, and so it's like someone who's, working in prevention, I'm sure that just drives you nuts to see like human trafficking utilized in that way, as if it only happens to the southern border, or if it only happens in like these other areas that you described. And I think, man, you bring up such a good point about like just kids, just being kids, and giving them like the tools and the knowledge to know like what's happening. And that's something that we do a lot in our program, is we help parents understand a couple different things. For one is it's not the kid's fault that they were exploited, and two, it's the stupid stuff they do online. This probably won't be the last time that they do something stupid online, because it's just so part of our world, right? Like we had this case where one of my favorite kids in the whole world, she came to us when she was 12. She's been abused by an American guy, and she's a great kid. Like she gets great grades. She's one of the happiest kids we have in our program, and she has a TikTok account. And she was singing a TikTok that was it was a song that was very sexual, very very sexual, and so we had an little intervention with her of to not do that, to not do those types of things, to make yourself a target, or maybe pick their songs a little more carefully, or the way you're dressed in TikToks. And as we were doing this training with her and her family, like her mother was obviously super upset with that she had done this, and we had to like intervene, like me being like, hey, if like it's hard being a kid nowadays, because everything is about content, everything is being filmed. Like you cannot make a mistake and not expect it to be online anymore, even something as innocent as that. In high school, one of my favorite songs was this song by Eminem called Bagpipes to Baghdad. And if you look at that song, like the lyrics, it's horrible. Like the lyrics on that are disgusting. They're sexual. They're horrific. But I really enjoyed the beat, and so I would listen to it, and I'd mouth it as I'm getting like hyped up for a basketball game. And thank goodness that no one filmed me doing that now. That could affect me, 20 years later. And so it's hard being a kid now. And one of the things that we include in our program is just helping parents understand like this is what real human trafficking looks like. Your kid is probably not going to be kidnapped from Colombia and taken to Ecuador, even though that might happen. More often than not, they can be exploited inside their own home if they have an unmonitored internet access in their bedroom. And the stuff that they do, like it's helped them to understand versus like putting the blame on them. I think that's I really enjoy what you said about all those different topics.
Yeah, it is a really hard world for kids and for parents too, because in our generation, we didn't have technology like it is now. And we've learned to use it. Even I don't consider myself an old person, right? I'm still in the millennial age, maybe on the far end of it, but the high end of it, but I'm still in that age. And technology, I didn't have it until pretty much after high school for me. I never had a cell phone growing up. I mean, MySpace was the big thing in high school growing up, and instant messages, right? And that was the thing. And so I wasn't on it. And so we don't understand it. And so we don't want to approach it because we don't understand it. And sometimes we give social media the benefit of the doubt sometimes, and we think our kids are safer than they actually are online. And we click the privacy, and in our head it relates to, okay, privacy equals protection, but that's not the case. Even though individuals have private accounts, there's still so much information that an individual does online that's public information, even if they have a private account, such as comments that they make on people's posts and likes that they do on pictures. And one of the aspects that is for me so intimidating and worrisome is that predators have, I call them advantages that they didn't have before online. Number one, they have all the time in the world. They can stay in that beginning phases of the grooming cycle of targeting an individual, learning information about them as long as they want online, because we come back and we give that information for free, right? We tell people about our day. We like certain photos. We interact in social media, doing it 100% the right way, right? Kids go on, they see their friends. Maybe their friend doesn't have a private account, and so they like some images or they make some comments on that person's, or the fact that they're friends with them. A predator can learn a lot from that information, right? They can narrow down where they go to school. They can understand some of their likes and dislikes. That's all public information, even if you have a private account. And predators can sit there and build a profile of a child with nothing pressing them, and they can do that for months if they want to, years if they really wanted to, right? They can take as much time as they want. They can be whoever they want, another advantage, right? They can create as many fake profiles as they want. They can narrow it down and say, well, I'm going to approach with a 14-year-old boy instead of a 15-year-old boy because I think that's going to be a better from what I've learned, right? And they can pick and they can be whoever they want. Uh, and these are things that to me are worrisome if we don't understand them as parents, and if kids don't understand them as well, that we have to, or else we put our kids and ourselves too at risk of being exploited online. And these are types of things, along with what you're saying, that we try to teach as well. Our main piece that we in our programming that we do is we provide a prevention curriculum. It was designed to go into school, so it's K through 12 curriculum for kids, and it teaches them and empowers them is its main goal. So for kindergartners, for example, we start with helping them identify within themselves, when do they feel safe and when do they feel unsafe? What makes them feel safe? What makes them feel unsafe? We don't define it for them. We help them understand, when do you feel safe, and build that understanding of their own emotion, that own instinct inside of them. We take that feeling and we tie it to situations. What situations make you feel safe? What situations make you feel unsafe? We tie that to individuals' actions. What actions that people do makes you feel safe? What actions that people do make you feel unsafe? And help them try to build that core feeling within in themselves, so that they can help protect themselves. And again, trying to empower. As it progresses, we start to introduce different scenarios and different schemes that tie into human trafficking and exploitation. We teach about online safety, but really what we try to empower is that feeling within themselves of safe and unsafe, and helping them understand situations, actions of individuals that are safe. And then what do I do when I don't feel safe? If I am in a situation where I don't feel safe, how do I respond? What do I do in that? Who can I go to? Where can I get the help, so I can get out of that situation, or whatever's happening to me, whatever this individual, how can I break that cycle of being unsafe, and hopefully disrupt again those cycles of abuse, the grooming, the abuse, the silence. How do we disrupt that these traffickers and predators are trying to force onto our children or individuals?
You mentioned real quick, I took a note, and we have these 40-minute Zoom calls, but we're gonna go over. And so usually what we do if we go over is we just take like a 10-minute potty break and then come back. So if you're good with it, I'm good with it.
Yeah,
Okay.
that sounds
So
good.
the grooming circle, you mentioned that earlier. I took a note of it. For parents that are listening to this, I'm assuming it's going to be mostly like parents that listen to this episode of, how to keep your kids safe. What is the grooming circle. Can you go? Is that how you describe it? The grooming, the triangle.
Cycle. Yeah.
Is it triangle?
I call it a cycle.
Cycle.
Um,
Cycle.
yeah,
What is
I
that?
call
Like,
it a
how can
cycle.
we, if there's a parent here, if there's a teenager listening here, like, and if they can recognize, hey, I'm talking with some kid I've never met from Cedar City or something, can you go through the grooming cycle just real quick so that we may know what that is and the steps that are involved?
Yeah, yeah. I think that's an important one to understand in how it looks and what the steps that an individual's doing, a predator's doing. So in most cases, that's going to start with an individual targeting a predator, a trafficker targeting an individual. They're going to find the person that they want to go after, and it's this isn't something that's just done by chance. They're not just walking down the street at Target trying to find an individual. They're even not just, looking for any individual online. They look for specific things that they're going to target. And again, they're looking for those vulnerabilities. They're going to look for individuals who don't have large support systems in their lives. That's why so often individuals like runaway youth or individuals from marginalized groups, ethnic minorities or racial minorities, the LGBTQ community, these are often people who are targeted by traffickers or predators because they don't have very big of a support system. They'll look for individuals, again, poverty is one, that they'll target individuals who they know are in areas and communities that have high levels of poverty. From there, after they target, then they're going to try to gain as much information about that individual as they can. This could come through online, just learning what they can about them through the information, again, that we put out there so much in our lives. It could come from talking to the individual. Maybe it's an in-person interaction of some sort. Maybe they've are communicating in chat online, but they're going to learn as much information as they can. Then generally they're going to try to isolate that individual. They're going to try to pull them away from being discovered from their support system. So many times in an online setting, it's going to look like moving from whatever app that they found them on to a less known app or a more secure app. So maybe they'll move from, just using an example, not because it's the number one place, but Instagram or Facebook. Then maybe they'll move over to something like Snapchat, or maybe they'll move to WhatsApp or Signal, something where it's more encrypted, it's easier to hide, it's less likely that they'll be discovered. So they'll isolate them. The same thing happens in person. They'll do the same thing. They'll try to move them away from their support system. I don't really like your parents. Maybe they've convinced them and they're in an in-person, like, how about you move in with me? Or how about you come here to where I'm at? And the goal is to isolate them. Then they'll begin to exploit them in some way. And not always does it jump to human trafficking right off the bat. In some cases, they might exploit with, um, you know, a threat of some sort, might be the exploitation. In an online situation, maybe they get something that they know that if a child's parents found out about, or if other people found out, that that child would be embarrassed or feel guilty about. Maybe it's a picture. Maybe it's not even a nude, but the fact that they know that child's parents would be upset if they knew they sent a picture, or even if they knew that they were communicating with someone they didn't know online, they'll use that to try to manipulate and exploit that individual. And then they'll move to maintaining control from it. And they'll guilt them with it. They'll threaten them with exposing them maybe. Maybe they did send a nude online and they'll threaten to release it to someone else. Maybe they'll threaten a family member. Maybe they'll threaten them with physical abuse, or maybe they will physically abuse them. But they'll maintain that control in some way. And then the cycle starts over. From there, they go back to loving them, to caring about them, to building rapport with them. And they start that cycle over again and then exploit again in some way. And generally this escalates. The exploitation will get worse. It'll grow further from there as they go through this cycle of exploiting and then threatening or maintaining control and then exploiting and maintaining control and going through that cycle from there. Um, so that kind of the basic is the grooming cycle that exists.
All right. All right, man. Well, so We talked a lot about prevention. We've talked a lot about the grooming cycle, and I want to get your thoughts. For some, well, there's a lot of funding in prevention. Like there's a lot of grants the Department of State gives out, different embassies give out as far as like prevention efforts and among the human trafficking, anti-human trafficking conversation, like there's the protection, there's the aftercare, there's the prevention, the policy, the prosecution, all these different things. For some, prevention is seen as the least impactful, the least sexy, whatever you want to call it, out of all those different ways to fight human trafficking. And the pushback they give is how do you measure prevention? Like how do you know that because of your efforts in prevention, like this child was never trafficked? Um, and like we've seen like some organizations like taking advantage of that, where I know a group that used to do like humanitarian trips to go give out shoes to kids in Argentina, in Belize, and they would call it prevention because now these kids have shoes, they won't be exploited because they're looking for shoes. And like I can I personally think this organization was taking advantage of those donor dollars. However, like I've also seen like in my work to where some victims have fallen victim because they didn't have the latest iPhone. Like I've seen that. I've seen that in the work to where essentially giving someone an iPhone could potentially stop them from being trafficked. So I guess my question is, like, long story short, what's your pushback on that? Like I'm sure you have some because you've made prevention like your focus. Like what's your pushback on people saying that prevention is the least important or the least sexy or whatever out of all these different ways to fight human trafficking? And then for you guys and organizations as a whole, how do you measure the prevention efforts in basically making sure that what you're doing is actually stopping potential victims from becoming victims?
Yeah, it's a great question, a great line of thought, and one that we have to deal with as we work on our programs all the time, right? Because we get those same pieces back to us if it's from donors or if it's trying to find organizations to support the efforts that we're doing and become kind of partners in our program is how do we know that this works? How do we know that something's coming from this? Because on the law enforcement side with interventions or aftercare supporting individual survivors, you can point to a specific thing, right? Like we had this operation and intervened and helped these people and these survivors get out of this situation, or we helped this survivor do these things, and you can track that. And it does become harder to track and define what is prevention? What does that even look like? And then how do we measure it? So I like that question and that line of thought because it's vital to understand and one of those barriers that we have to overcome because prevention is so vital. The first thing we have to understand with prevention that's different, I think, than what people want it to be is it's long term. It's not a quick thing. It's not like we can go in and support law enforcement on this recovery and it's done and we're good. Or this survivor needs this thing. We can help them with school or we can help them with vocational training or we can do that. People want in many times just that quick thing, right? I did this thing, I donated, I supported, and it did this thing and it's done. But prevention's a long-term piece. And we have to understand that we're disrupting culture, we're disrupting these cycles that exist. Um, and it's not something that can happen right away. So you have to be prepared for long term. For us, we we don't go into areas without being invited, without having a relationship in that, because in all humanitarian work, but in human trafficking, it's not something that I can solve long term from the outside in, right? We have to have the community involvement. We have to have local support in it. That's local government, local law enforcement, community members, local organizations, whoever it is that we're working with. The goal has to be ultimately to hand it off to them. It has to be to get to the point where they're doing these things, whatever it is. If that's prevention program, if that's uh, um, an after school program, if that's a community kitchen, if it's an economic activity, that has to become theirs in time. So we always have to work with an organization in that community and work alongside them to develop these programs and customize them to the needs that they have. We've talked about how human trafficking looks different everywhere, how it can predators target in different ways and use different schemes to go after individuals. So we have to know and work with local community organizations to develop these types of programs for it. And then I think I say all that because once we start to do that, then we can define what success looks like because it's going to look different in every area as well. And in one community, your metrics of success might look different than it might look in another community as you identify what traffickers are doing and how these schemes are working, there's there's commonality among them in a community generally. Generally, traffickers identify a location and they work within that location, that region, in a similar way. It could be in a poor community and they're targeting with online ads for job opportunities, right? They might be saying they know that this place doesn't have much economic opportunity. They know that individuals are trying to get out of this location. Venezuela is a great example, and I know that's a place you do a lot of work with individuals from Venezuela and working in Venezuela. It's an area where there's not economic opportunity. There's individuals who are wanting to get out. So traffickers use a very similar scheme in a lot of areas in Venezuela and Colombia, and that's sending a targeted job opportunity to leave Venezuela, go somewhere else and work in a hotel, work in a restaurant, work in a tourist related field in a lot of cases, right? To get them out. And so our prevention efforts would be how do we disrupt that? And if we're going to say how we need to disrupt this scheme of fake targeted ads where they're trying to get young women to go to another country to work in this industry, how can we stop that from happening? It could be educating women on watch out for these types of ads. How can you spot a fake ad before you reply to it? Or if you do respond to this fake ad, what are some of the things that stand out, that the way that they talk to you? They're rushing you to do something. They're asking for your papers. It's a lot cheaper and a lot easier than legitimate routes that you know about, right? These are things that could tip off an individual. Once we develop a program, then we can understand, well, what should an individual do in that case? Well, they should reach out to so and so, or they should break the cycle by talking to so and so. And now we can develop a metric of how many reports came from individuals in this community warning us about this, right? Saying to the local law enforcement, here's an ad that I saw. Without that education and that cycle, most people would either fall for it or not fall for it and then do nothing about it, right? They just go on their way and say, oh, that was fake. Um, but if we involve local organizations and we involve local law enforcement, we involve local community groups, then we can start to develop some metrics that will help us understand if our prevention programs are working or not. But we have to tailor our programs to the local situation that's happening. If we don't do that, then it becomes more vague and ambiguous. If we're just going into a community and trying to say, watch out for human traffickers, they might sell you for sex or they'll force you for labor to work somewhere, then we don't have anything to measure it by. But if we understand trafficking and we build programs targeted at those schemes that traffickers are doing, then we can build metrics that can do that. And that could be a metrics of an individual who broke out of that cycle of grooming before exploitation happened. Or it could be disclosures that happen. And for us, that's one of the biggest metrics. For us, to show that our programs are being successful is the number of disclosures of abuse that happen in an area where we're running our programs. Not because abuse has increased in that area at all. Abuse is happening. And even with prevention programs, sadly, abuse is going to happen. Either if it's individuals who get tricked still, if it's by some sort of force, abuse is still going to happen. But like I said, one of our goals is to break that cycle of silence, of survivors feeling like they can't say anything, like they don't have a place to turn. So for us, disclosures is a major indicator of success of our program in an area. And you'll have the metrics of number of people taught and communities that we're running our programs and um, those types of metrics as well. But we try to nail it down to again understanding trafficking in that community by working with local organizations and then building programs that target specifically how trafficking is happening. And then we can understand success because we're disrupting that specific type of trafficking. We're not just throwing out this major giant net and hoping that it stops someone. Because, yeah, how will you ever know if someone's trafficked or not, or if we did prevent it from going there, if we're just throwing out this major kind of ambiguous net and calling it prevention?
Man, that was really good. There's so many. Well, just a comment. Like when I first got involved in like anti-human trafficking, we did prevention. We found a community where a bunch of girls were being exploited in the Dominican Republic, and essentially decided the best way to cover their to prevent them from being exploited was to cover their education. And and 10 years later, of the 25 girls we were supporting, 24 of them were sexually exploited, and the only one that wasn't was one that moved away from that community. So like we had to do like an internal like look inward of like, well, that didn't work. Obviously didn't work because every single one of these kids were sexually exploited. And we decided we realized we were fighting against a culture. Like we weren't doing enough against the culture as well, to where you can pay for an education, but if you're not fighting the culture, if you're not able to kick out a dictator like in Venezuela, there's still going to be so many vulnerable people. And so our metrics, the way we were doing it, were off. And the way we were partnering with local leaders and the way we were doing the whole thing was just off. And it was a good learning lesson for us to definitely like not do that again. So I really appreciate what you said in that regard, as well as is doing it long term and adapting to different cultures, different situations. I think the reporting is so important. Like when those numbers goes up, it's actually a good thing. And I've told this story a couple different times, that in our program, like in Medellin, Colombia, we we used to only get reports of girls who were abused by American men when the American did something weird. If he was really abusive or he was really violent or used drugs to drug them out, or if he filmed the abuse without their consent and uploaded it to Pornhub or Telegram or something, that's when we would get a lot of these reports when the American did something weird. And now we're getting reports now of just an American that offered them sex for money. And culturally, for a long time in Colombia, that was seen as normal. And with the added like attention of the press, with these added arrests, with people understanding and given like the proper terminology to understand what's going on, that meant the reporting's gone up because you're fighting against the culture, and you're gaining some ground to where people realize it, despite this being culturally acceptable, it's a crime and you can actually get help and get justice because this is happening. So it's getting victims and potential victims the verbiage to describe what's happening to them. And I think it allows you to empower individuals to offer support to others that may not have like that same verbiage. Like we had this case, this really sad case of this MMA fighter from Arizona who had abused his 13-year-old girl. He put it on the internet, and this little girl happened to be going to the same school as one of our other survivors who was maybe 17 or 16. And because she knew what was going on and she had the terminology and the resources to get this girl help, she told us, she was like, hey, this little girl is getting bullied mercilessly in school because of what happened to her. She's 13. I obviously know this is abuse. She might not. Can I go reach out to her and kind of explain how I got help and offer her that same help? And we're like, yeah, of course, like please do. And it's like you said, like the culture of silence, like breaking the culture of silence and giving people the verbiage and the terminology to describe what's happening to them, or to be able to share that with others that may not have that same verbiage or that same those same descriptive tendencies to describe the abuse that they're currently going through.
Yeah, I think that's a huge part of it is breaking that culture, and because you have some individuals, especially when you start to talk about children, that this becomes the normal, right? And they think this is what everyone's happening to them. We don't talk about it, but this is what happens to the kids at my school. And then they find out in some of these areas, and not just in foreign countries, in the United States as well. Then they find out that someone else is being abused. And so then it reinforces that of like, oh, this is happening to everyone here. and then we just don't talk about it, and I'll just get through it, and we will move on, right? And that culture of abuse, that culture of silence, gets reinforced, and then they just think I have to live within it, and it's huge to break that cycle, to help them understand this isn't normal, that it's wrong what's happening to you, and that we're here to help you, and that we'll believe you. And those cycles, the United States isn't immune to that. Those cycles of belittling survivors, making them feel like it was their fault. There's countless movements that are, you know, what was she wearing? Or something along that line. Because here in the United States, that's one of the questions. How much had she drank and how much was she wearing when it comes to abuse? And those cultural stigmas and that culture needs to be broken and changed. And as we're building our programs, in the prevention side, you have to be aware of that. And it plays into the factor that, again, it adds time for these programs to take effect. You can't just go swinging in at the prevention program and think that you're going to disrupt it in the first day. If anything, in doing that, you're just going to drive the people that you want to help away, either because they're going to be pulled away, or their abuser is going to pull them away from that support system. So you have to build the trust. You have to help them understand that you're there, that you care, you're there for the long term. You can't just be an advocate in a moment, right? You have to be a long-term advocate in supporting them if you're looking to break these cultural norms, if you will, that have been built in these communities.
So, I know you guys are an up and coming organization. You guys are fairly new. I know we've talked about a lot of different places, Venezuela, Cedar City, like all these different places across the states around the world. With your guys' program, where are you guys going to start? Where are you guys focused on? And why did you pick these places to start your prevention movement?
Yeah. So our main programs right now are being run in Ecuador. It's kind of our biggest, and moving forward at the quickest, in a number of regions in Ecuador, in Guayaquil, in a couple of communities near Guayaquil, and then in Chicao on the northern border of Ecuador and Colombia. Um, and the reason that we started in Ecuador is it's a group of people that I've been working with for a while now. I was working with the Ministry of the Interior there and the National Police, and we'd been developing programs. And again, the organization that was at said, "Hey, we're not doing these anymore," and they said, "Wait, but we really want them to keep going." So that's what kept us there and kept us moving forward is our community partners in country, in communities, and they've been something we've been working on for probably 2 years now in some way in different areas in Colombia. But we're going to launch three new programs in three different areas of Colombia that have unique community setups. They're different in their ruralness. The one's very much in a city and has different problems than another one that's agricultural based community, and another one that's kind of a very rural village, small village out in the middle of nowhere. Um, and so trafficking looks different, the community looks different. And so it'll help us develop pilot programs to see how this program could run and hopefully grow it to larger areas in Panama, or sorry, in uh, Ecuador, and then in maybe even countries nearby and different regions nearby. Um, and what we do in any of our programs is, again, working with communities. We usually focus in three spaces. We run our prevention program that I talked about, our K through 12 program. It's not always run in schools. Sometimes it's run in whatever's available. So community group or an after school program if it exists. In one area, the National Police there in Ecuador, they run some community programs already where they do soccer and dance. So we're just going to launch it and run it inside that program. So it's not always in a school. Then we usually, if it doesn't exist, we build some sort of community program, an opportunity to create a safe space for individuals in the community. So a lot of times in Latin America, it's football, it's dance, it's boxing, it's art. So we usually develop some sort of after school type program to again create community for those individuals, those kids to come to a safe place. And then the final thing is again disrupting vulnerabilities. So in Ecuador, poverty is very high in a lot of places, and it's a vulnerability that is exploited. So we try to develop programs to disrupt poverty. That can be helping increase education, opportunity, vocational training, even down to in some areas just providing. We're developing community kitchens where we help build a community kitchen. It's run by the community members. Individuals, kids primarily, and women can come and get one meal a day. And then there's women in the community who work in the kitchen and can earn a stipend. So they're earning some money. It provides food so that again they don't have to go and look for that, or it's one less thing that a trafficker can use against them. Or in another one of the cool pieces we're doing in another area in Ecuador is developing I guess kind of like a business class for women. Doing street vending is very popular and able to happen in this area. So we're developing it's going to be about a 2 month, maybe 3 month course that women can sign up for, and they learn how to run a business. So we teach them about, managing a business. We teach them how to budget and to finance, and then we teach them to make a product. And in this case, mostly what we're going to make is empanadas verde. So it's very popular in that area. So we'll teach them how to make that. And then we've worked with the local municipality to provide a space where there'll be the kitchen utensils and everything that they need to make the empanadas. And then when they're done with the course, we'll give them a cart that they can then use to sell on the street. And it helps them work towards something. We're not just giving them the cart and saying, "Hey, go and do it," because so many examples show that doesn't work. So they work towards it. They learn a skill. They learn how to run a business. They learn how to make the empanadas. And then we give them the resource of the cart to utilize. And then again, we have a building where they can store the cart. They can make the empanadas there, and they can go out and sell them to provide an income or economy for themselves. So these are programs that again we've been developing for years there in Ecuador and working towards for quite some time, um, and now finally launching them. The other place that we're doing a lot of work is here in the United States in Alaska, and working primarily with the Alaskan Native tribes in Alaska. And we focus on, in the United States, we focus our efforts on Native populations, indigenous populations, and supporting them. The reason we do that is it's an underserved demographic here in the United States and globally. Indigenous populations are underserved populations globally. But in the United States, they often don't have access to the same resources, the same programming, the same support. Even though there's massive amounts of funding, there's not as many programs that help indigenous populations. And not always do the indigenous populations look to the outside for help either, for a lot of different reasons that could probably take up an entire podcast itself. So luckily and gratefully, we've been able to get in over the years of the work that I've done with some Alaskan Native tribes there, and to develop similar programs. Again, focusing on those areas that I talked about. We'll teach our prevention program. We'll develop some sort of community program that can bring people together, and then look to disrupt the vulnerability that exists. And we adapt our program to fit the need there. And for example, there in Alaska, one of the major issues with trafficking is individuals leaving their rural villages out in the bush in Alaska and coming to an urban area. And they come for a number of different reasons. Young individuals, primarily women, will come for a number of different reasons. One might be because of the high levels of abuse that happen in these villages. Another one could just be looking for opportunity. They say to themselves, "I don't want to just live my whole life in this village and just sustain, right? That's what my family's been doing for years, and I want to do something different." So it's not always to run away from abuse or something. It could be looking for opportunity. But they come into these major rural areas, and traffickers know it. They know that they're going to show up and they're not going to have support. They're not going to have a plan, really. They don't know where they're going to stay, where they're going to work. And so traffickers just wait for them. And there were some studies done by an organization up there in Alaska that they found that a trafficker will approach a native individual who leaves the village and shows up in Anchorage specifically. They'll approach them within 72 hours of their landing. They'll target them, and they'll offer them a place to stay. They'll offer them work. They know that they're coming into Anchorage, and they know that they're not going to have support. So again, they feel that need. They look for it, that vulnerability, and they exploit it. Um, and so our program, working with these tribes, is going out into the villages and educating them on that scheme, educating them to understand if you do leave Anchorage, if you I mean, if you leave your village and go to Anchorage, this is what's potentially going to happen. These traffickers know it. And here's the resources that you can utilize there instead of a trafficker, right? So you don't have to feel like you're running with no plan, but here's how you can develop a plan. Here's how we can disrupt that scheme, that cycle, is educating individuals in the villages with it. We're also going to be doing some um, prevention classes for abuse and trying to disrupt that culture of abuse that exists. And on top of that, supporting cultural revitalization. Pretty much every tribe in the United States is their culture's dying. So many of them, because of colonization and the years of things that have happened over the years with white individuals and tribes, um, and then their older natives are dying off. Languages in native communities are dying. Culture is being lost, and so we work with the tribes and develop and help run culture programs where that culture can be passed on. The elders can come and teach the language and can teach the customs and the culture to help pass that on and reinvigorate the culture among those communities. So those are our two biggest areas, Ecuador and in Alaska. But we're also working some in Panama and in Ukraine. Or those four are kind of our biggest pieces, and most of those are carrying over from relationships that have been developed over the years of working in that space. But we're always looking for new places, again, by invitation. We want to work with local groups. We want to work with local organizations. How can we help carry out your vision with you? How can we help support what you're trying to do in your community?
I think that's awesome, man. I think you're going about the right way. And it's like someone who's from Wyoming and who sees people that are natives, like their culture dying out. And Alaska, every year when like the human rights reports come out from the Department of State, Alaska is always at the very bottom, if not the bottom, as far as like a place that's safe for women. So I think you're doing it the right way. You're doing it in a way that's trauma sensitive, the way it's educated. And so if people like want to get involved with like what you're doing, if they want to make a donation, if they want to volunteer, if they want to do whatever, where do they go to find your nonprofit?
The best place would be our website, preventempower.org. I can send you links and we can do that. Again, before this launches, I'll put more information on there. Right now, it's kind of bare bones as we've been trying to work on it, but I'll make sure it's up to date so people can find information. Um, one of the things that's important to me is over the years of it being in the human trafficking space, I've been in the space in some way or another for about 9 years. Most of that time was as a volunteer with various organizations. But to me, it was always frustrating because most of the time, what volunteer meant was raise money for us. And that's an important piece, right? Organizations need the money, but that's not a volunteer to me. And at the previous organizations that I've been at, I ran the volunteer program and I always tried to get it to a place where volunteers could do something. And sometimes that's hard built inside some organizations just because of the way they work, right? Some some organizations are heavy law enforcement support and helping on interventions and recoveries. And that's a hard place for a volunteer to be. Some are heavy aftercare support. And that's a hard place for volunteers to be because you want to protect privacy and sensitivity of individuals. But the beauty about prevention is everyone can get involved in it. It's not something that we don't have those same barriers that exist in other places. So our goal is to develop programs and ways for people to actively get involved in their communities or supporting our work and help in other communities around the world because it's a space where we're not limited by some of those other pieces that organizations. I know yours, for example, is one that you have to be sensitive of your survivors. You have to be sensitive of what they've gone through and their privacy and safety, in so many ways. So we want to develop programs where people can get involved and people can help develop and build the programs in their communities in a hands-on way that volunteer isn't going to mean fundraiser for our organization. Now, if people want to do that, great, wonderful. But we want to give meaningful ways for people to get involved too. That is often hard to find in the anti-trafficking space for legitimate reasons.
Yeah. Yeah, we put some limits on ours. For one, we had someone the other day that reached out and was like, I want to go undercover. We're like, we don't do that, bro. Like, we don't do
Yeah.
undercover. We've like throughout the years, I've seen so much money wasted in undercover work that's just like that money in our opinion. I told the guy this. I was like, our ops, like what we do is we make the survivor so safe and so empowered that she then tells you who the bad guys are, and then law enforcement goes after them, and we help support them financially, whatever they may need. There's no need for undercover. There's no need for greasing palms. There's no need for any of that because it's a survivor run case. It goes at her speed, his speed, that catches people that are really doing it and not someone that may be looking just to take advantage of someone economically. And then we had a guy reach out maybe like a month and a half ago that wanted to volunteer with our survivors that lives in one of the cities that we work in. And this guy was actually on our list of people that we're investigating. So we're like, no, obviously not. Like we didn't tell him of like, oh, you're under investigation, so you're not going to volunteer. It's like we just left him on red. But I think you described it so well where the beauty of prevention is that everybody can get involved in it as long as they're like willing to learn what that means. And like some of these people, I'm just thinking off the top of my head, like some of these people that maybe that go on TikTok and talk about the van at Target, thinking that they're helping. It's like take that desire to help and to educate, transform it into something that's actually legitimate, that comes from the cycle of grooming, that knows the vulnerabilities that people can be affected by trafficking, that know kind of the warning signs, the legit warning signs, power them with the knowledge, then go and educate their community in a way that's legit and spread that knowledge. Like I think that's such a beautiful way to describe it. Is the beauty of prevention is that everybody can get involved in it. And do I just think it's awesome what you're doing. I think it's awesome that um just very you build these relationships, you built this program, you found this passion, you met people where they're at. And when people said to stop doing that, you said, no, I won't. And you made legit promises to people and you're fulfilling that. So I think it's awesome. I think it's incredibly brave. I think it shows a lot of your character. And as we close this thing out, is there anything that you want to put out into the universe or anything that we didn't touch on? Is there anything that you want to share about your organization that we haven't touched on so far in this podcast?
I think just the thing that always comes to mind for me in the anti-human trafficking space and focused on prevention again is we can all do it. It's something that everyone can be a part of. It doesn't take as much as we think it does. It takes being informed and being willing to share and act on the information that you have. Um, and the other final thing that I always love to talk about and to mention again is something that we talked about previously, and that's going back to caregivers and parents in talking to their children is have the conversations, right? Open up the conversations. Start to discuss it in a non-blaming way, especially here in the United States as we talk like online safety, but even outside the United States, in other areas where they're targeting poverty and they're targeting other vulnerabilities, eh, having a relationship with your children, an open relationship where they can trust you is vital. And we can start that by just opening up to our children and telling them that we care about them and listening to them and letting them know we won't blame you. We care about you. And it might come off the wrong way. It might come off as being controlling, but it's love. It's wanting to protect you and keep you safe from it. So I think having the conversations and just beginning to, because so often we're too silent about it with it. And the other one that I say to any individual, but especially children or who listen to this is if you find yourself caught in this cycle, know that it's not your fault. Know that there are people who support you, who care about you, and reach out to them. reach out to them. And if it's to, to your organization, that they listen to your podcast and they send you a message, reach out to someone, because there are people who care about you, and it's not your fault that you're in this, and there's those who want to help you get out of that, and that hope has to be there. And that's why we throw empower into our name, because we try to empower individuals, because at the end of the day, that's who's going to break this cycle, is those individuals, as we educate them, as we help them understand, and as we let them know there's people here who want to help you.